But as I say, good morning, everybody. I will, as ever, we'll give this a couple of minutes to get everybody joining, because here we go, got more people waiting in the waiting room. But to those who I've not spoken with before, I'm recognising a lot of faces, but equally some new ones. My name's Matthew Baird. I have been in social housing recruitment now for 10.5 years. I set up on my own a year and a half ago. And I use the money, or quite a bit of the money that I get from my recruitment to run these, basically. I started them during lockdown, that we used to get 4 or 5 people a week, and now we definitely don't. Now we're getting loads every week, which is absolutely brilliant. And we discuss a huge range of topics within the social housing world. And I've worked with Jo on these really since the very early days, Jo. We've been running these, haven't we?
Yeah.
And it's often around the kind of the customer journey, but I think it doesn't take long at the moment to kind of look at the news and look what's going on. That tenant voice is definitely getting more empowered, as it should be, but also that the sector needs to be doing more. And so we came together. I'll let you introduce yourself, Jo.
Okay, so I think some of you know who I am. I recognise quite a few people today and LinkedIn connections of mine. So you'll certainly know who I am and what I do, because I'm quite voracious on LinkedIn. Post quite often, but I run a company called Big Picture Training, and actually I've got Sian and Ellie from Big Picture Training on the session today as well. And we provide training to the not-for-profit and the primarily, I have to say, the social housing sector in both the UK and Australia. So it's interesting to draw comparisons between both countries, which I'll do a little bit today in terms of, I've got a little presentation for you. So I've deliberately drawn up a presentation because it keeps me on track, because Sian and Ellie will both contest that I get so passionate about these topics that you're not careful, you can't shut me up. So I have done a little presentation for you just to run through that and keep me on track. Michelle, you've got your hand up. Are you okay?
Yeah, sorry.
You just raised your hand. Okay. You can tell I'm used to
fine.
using Zoom. Just checking the room.
To anyone who is new to, Tom, I've just seen that you just put congratulations in. Yeah, I've been requested to be vice chair of a supported exempt accommodation forum. So thanks for that, Tom, this morning. But to anyone who hasn't been on these before, I've realised, Jo, I haven't done housekeeping, so that's on me. Please feel, as Tom has done there, anytime to use the chat function if you just want to put something in and not necessarily come on to the actual comms. But this has always been a forum where we like people to talk if they feel comfortable to do so. So do use the reaction symbol as utilised just there to raise hand at any point. My role in this is very much as a person to kind of run that side of things. So I'll be keeping an eye out for hands coming up, hands going down, people who've not talked before, people who have talked quite a few times, and just engaging where we can. And Jo will be running more the content piece, because obviously this is her specialism. So Jo, I'll pass over to you to start the presentation, but I think we're both the same in that get on track early.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll run through my presentation, and then basically what I'm going to do is just hand it all over to you, just so that we can have a really good discussion around this. So the presentation is really just to get you in the right frame of mind and thinking about the issues that I'm going to raise. So I'll just share my screen with you, make sure that you can see that all right. So you should all be able to see that first slide in my slide deck now. Can you just give me the thumbs up just to let me know that that's what you're seeing and I'm not sharing my bank statement or something with you? That's always my biggest fear on Zoom. I'm going to share something I shouldn't share. Okay, fantastic. I'm glad you can all see that. All right. Okay, so we know, and it's not news to anybody here today, that the sector is coming under increasing scrutiny. And we know that there are a number of factors that are driving that. The latest English Housing Survey report that was published, I think it was in December last year, that shows that more than 59% of social housing residents who complained weren't happy with the response to their complaint. And then at the same time, the Housing Ombudsman has seen a huge increase. I mean, the last statistic that I saw was 139% increase. I think it's more than that now. I think we've gone over 200% in terms of complaints in the last year. The Charter for Social Housing Residents and the new TSMs, tenant satisfaction measures, they aim to ensure that tenants know how to raise concerns when things go wrong, and that they can be confident that their landlord will put things right. And we can expect to see more complaints because, yes, just yesterday, actually, the Department for Levelling Up issued a tender for resources to upskill customers to speak up and raise issues with their landlord. So we're going to see more complaints come in, and I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's a good thing, because complaints are a golden nugget of feedback. And these issues aren't just confined to the UK, let me tell you, because we work across New Zealand actually, as well as Australia. The Ombudsman in Victoria, Australia, they got fed up with the volume of escalations that they were receiving from tenants. And they've just completed an investigative review into the way social housing providers manage their complaints services in Australia as well. So this isn't just confined to the UK. We are dealing with this over in Oz too. Since we last discussed complaints on the round table, and I think that was January, wasn't it, Matt?
Something like that. It's absolutely flown by, but yeah, something
It's
along those lines.
but it's been 8 months, 8 or 9 months. Us at Big Picture Training, we've undertaken a number of service reviews for landlords in both the UK and Australia, largely because of the Ombudsman's review in Australia, and landlords out there wanting to prove to the registrar that they are managing their complaints well. And also because the Independent Housing Ombudsman issued a revised code in terms of the complaints code on the 1st of April. And landlords have until the 1st of October to become compliant with that. So if you did a review when it was first issued back in 2020, you need to do another one. And if you haven't done that already, you need to have done it by October. So a few organisations have asked us to do that as an independent review. And our review is holistic. We don't simply audit against the code. It's not an auditing exercise only. It is in part, but not only. We don't simply audit against the code. We undertake a qualitative review to gauge perception, which is what the TSMs will do for many of their measures. So many of the TSM measures.
I'm working.
Sorry, can everybody go on mute? We've got someone talking. I was trying to work out who it was. Thank you. Sorry, Jo, back to you.
It's all right. Many of the TSM measures will actually gauge perception. So that's what we do when we do a review. So we listen to customers, we listen to staff, we're totally impartial. So our review is objective. We're not coming in with any preconceived ideas. So it's not subjective, it's objective. So what have we learned along the way? That's what you all want to know. What have we learned along the way? Well, we've learned that the issues in the UK and Australia are the same, that's for sure. Absolutely no differences whatsoever. The sector in the UK is slightly more mature than in Australia, but the issues are the same, which is worrying because a lot of it's cultural. So it says that the cultural issues are the same in Australia as they are in the UK. We've learned that people managing complaints don't tend to treat complaints as a valuable source of feedback. Often those dealing with complaints, they perceive them as a nuisance, something that's they've got to do. You know, it's come in like an Exocet missile and it's annoying. It's something that they've got to do. And rather than welcoming the feedback, they unconsciously bias all complainants based on their experience of a minority of unreasonable complainants. And that's why I've put on this slide, the majority of complainants don't set out to be unreasonable. They just don't. It's a very, very small percentage that actually do it deliberately. Most complainants just want the situation to be resolved, like you and I do when we encounter an issue in our day-to-day lives. We just want it sorted. And I had an issue with British Gas the other day, actually, and they said, all I want is hot water. I mean, I'm not so bothered at the moment because it's so hot, but you know, all I really want is hot water. But they said, we can give you £60. And I said, well, I don't really want the money, just want the situation to be resolved. And that's the same with our customers. They just want the situation to be resolved, and they become unreasonable because of the way they're treated, when there's no compassion, when there's no empathy, and when there's no respect. That's when they become unreasonable, when they're feeling it, and people feel it. They can feel a lack of respect. And ownership of complaints has been a big issue we've found as well. So many organisations now through necessity, have got complaints handling teams. So they've got to have somebody who owns complaints for the organisation. And many organisations have set up small complaints handling teams who are employed because of their mindset, their attitude and their behaviours. So they've got the right mindset. The people in the complaints handling team have got the right mindset. They've got the right attitudes. They've got the right behaviours. But it's not necessarily those people that need to review their behaviours or receive training. It's when complaints get handed out to investigating officers, generally managers, and they become responsible complaint owner, if you like. And that's where the service tends to fall down, particularly if it's a multifaceted complaint that's across more than one organisation. And in those situations, complaints almost become like, and I think just recently we've had one comment that they're a bit like a hot potato with no one taking ownership. And overwhelmingly, customers complain that people don't communicate effectively, even when the complaint was about a communication issue. So communication's a real big issue. And actually on training, when I've done complaints training with organisations, people have said, we don't want to call them when we get a complaint because they're going to be angry. Yeah. Yes, they're going to be angry, but they're going to be even more angry if you don't call them than if you do call them and you show them empathy, compassion, respect and concern and try to understand the situation from their point of view. And I think that's why there's reluctance, because people just don't they don't necessarily have the time, they don't necessarily have the skills to deal with somebody who's not happy and may shout at them. And we're suffering from empathy fatigue a little bit, I think, as well, and compassion fatigue in the sector at the moment. I think that's a big issue. Organisations have volumes and volumes of feedback from complaints, but they don't routinely use it to improve services. They'll put the issue right for the complainant, but pardon the pun, they don't think big picture. So they don't think, hang on, we've got a whole street or a block of these properties. Might this issue be impacting on other tenants? Which is really short-sighted, actually, because we know that 96% of unhappy customers don't actually complain. So what about those silent voices? What about the people who aren't talking to us? They're sitting there unhappy, but and we could be talking to them about issues. Imagine if you were sitting there unhappy about a service provider and they suddenly rang you and talked to you about an issue that you were unhappy about. It turns it on its head. It's preventative. Rather than firefighting against all the issues, you're actually taking some preventative measures because of the learning that you've had from previous complaints. Most organisations, not all, capture and log the learning from complaints. So a lot of organisations still aren't logging the learning from complaints. That's as far as it goes for some. Very few routinely embed the learning from complaints into service reviews. So if they're going to review a service, they don't routinely say, okay, let's have a look at all the complaints we've received about that service and have those inform the service review. And they don't necessarily inform ongoing service delivery, which means that the same issues keep happening over and over again. And although a few organisations publish their learning from complaints, that, you know, quite a few do, and they'll do them in a variety of ways. Our caveat to publishing your learning is just to make sure you've actually made changes as a result of that learning before you publish it. Otherwise, it's reputationally damaging, because if you publish learning from a complaint and then you go on to keep repeating the same mistakes, your reputation is going to take a nosedive. There is one organisation that publishes explainer videos, and we absolutely love that when we saw those, because they are really accessible. They're there on the website, and it's interesting to watch. It's fun and interesting to watch. So there's some good practice out there, but a lot of people aren't doing it, and possibly rightly so, because if they're not putting things right as a result of their learning, then, you know, it can be reputationally damaging. Most important, though, I think, in terms of learning, is to share it internally. So some organisations share their learning internally at management and team level. So you'll often hear, yeah, senior management team talk about it, the exec get reports on it, the board get to see the learning from complaints. Our team will talk about complaints and share the learning from that across the team. But actually, it's not necessarily shared across other teams and within the organisation. So one team may well have learned from a complaint, but has everybody else in the organisation learned from that complaint? Is the learning being shared? And when on training and in these reviews, we ask employees to give us an example of a service that's changed as a result of a complaint. Many tell us, many staff, employees tell us nothing changes. We keep repeating the same mistakes over and over again. And actually, Matt ran a poll on this topic a few days ago, about 4 days ago. How well do we embed learning from complaints? And that poll bore out exactly what our delegates and employees are telling us when we're doing these reviews. 53% of respondents said nothing changes. So it's over half said that nothing changes. 38% said we do it pretty well, but we could do more. So they're acknowledging they could do more than they do already. And only 3% of people actually said the sector embeds learning from complaints very well. And maybe they do in that person's organisation. Maybe they do, because there are a couple of organisations out there that do it well. But the problem is that the customers say the same thing, which leads to the attitude that it's pointless to complain because nothing ever happens anyway. And that's a problem, because if people aren't telling you when things go wrong, you don't know that things are going wrong. And that results then in you getting annual survey feedback from customers that says they don't feel listened to. It's not so much about listening skills, which often organisations make the mistake of thinking, oh, staff all need listening skills training because they're not listening. It's not so much about that. It's more about people are telling you what's wrong in your organisation and you're not doing anything about it. It doesn't appear to them that anything is changing. So you'll get that feedback on your surveys because customers can't see the changes. They can't see anything different as a result of the complaints and the feedback that they've given you. And service users are the best source of information about what you can do differently. You know, you only got to think about organisations that you've had poor service from, and you'll sit there and you'll tell your friends, you'll tell your family, if only they did this, that, the other, it would be so much better. Well, our tenants are doing the same thing. They're telling us, and are we listening to them? Not always. Not always. We're not. And if we are, we're not telling them what we've done, so they're not seeing it. And then make it accessible. You know, how annoying is it when you want to make a complaint but you can't find how to do it? It's really annoying. And some organisations are indirectly discriminating against some of their customer cohort by not making the process accessible. For example, for those people where English might not be their first language, or where they may have people who are functionally illiterate, or they're visually impaired, or for example, there's just some examples. And we found some good practice on that. So well, maybe more than one website actually that I found that use a widget called ReachDeck, which enlarges text. It's fantastic. I tested it out just to see how it works. It enlarges text. It reads text in different languages.
I know I've used Recite Me for exactly the same thing. I know they're on the housing websites, and I agree that there's some amazing tools out there, but it's just about doing your research, isn't it?
It's about doing your research and thinking like that. You know, what about if I'm functionally illiterate? Yes, I might look at the website, but am I going to be able to read your policy and understand it? Because if you're functionally illiterate, you can read or write, but I think there's a very high statistic. I think it's about 30% of people in the UK and it's 47% in Australia are functionally illiterate, which means that they can read and write, but they're not going to be able to consume your policy and understand it. But if you can listen to it being read out to you, more likely to be able to understand what it's saying. And exasperatingly, very exasperatingly, some organisations are still making it a requirement that people fill out a complaints form if they want to complain. So there's some where that's the only option. you know, and the staff will tell you, yeah, we just send them a complaints form. And I think, talk about putting barriers in the way of people making a complaint, because you know 96% of us don't want to make a complaint anyway, and now you're telling someone they've got to fill out a form. Well, they're just not going to do it, are they? So the Independent Housing Ombudsman first introduced the Complaint Handling Code in 2020, and all the providers assess their services against that code then. So why are we still seeing these issues? You know, it's really frustrating for all of us, but it's frustrating for our customers, and it's not rocket science. Where we see complaints being managed well, it's because the culture is right. It's a culture, it's a cultural thing as well as a training issue. So not only is it about getting the culture right, it's about making sure that people have these skills as well. So it's cultural and training. It's not just training, and it's not just cultural, it's both. So where we see complaints being managed well, the culture is at the heart of that complaints process. People are welcoming complaints. They're seeing them as something positive. In the same way as when we get a compliment, we shout about it, you know, and we say, yay, we got a compliment. We have, you know, when I was a head of housing or general manager of housing in Australia, yes, let's all have chocolate and cake. We've got a compliment. We should be doing the same thing for complaints, really. Yay, we've got a really valuable complaint here. It's telling us what's wrong with the organisation, what we can do differently. They have a complaints service that's open and accessible to all, and staff, front-facing staff, are empowered to make decisions. So it's not just like British Gas with that £60. It's not just about that. It's about being empowered to actually do something. So what I really wanted that British Gas guy to be able to do was to plan me in to have my boiler looked at sooner, because it wasn't working because of them. Their engineer came to service it and then it stopped working. So ultimately I want that done more quickly because they caused the problem. But he didn't have the power to do that. He wasn't empowered to do that. He could give me £60, but that's not what I wanted. I wanted a sooner appointment. Ask customers if they're happy with the way their complaint has been handled, and then learn from their feedback. Don't just log it, and prove to them that you've learned from the feedback. Show them how you've learned from that feedback. And some organisations do that, some organisations don't. Have clear processes and service standards in place so that customers know what to expect. And most organisations do, most housing organisations have got service standards, but are you measuring yourself against those? Are you really holding yourself accountable to make sure that you are providing that service? And then share the learning from complaints and embed the learning into service improvement processes. If we do all of those things, it will work, but we're not. And why aren't we? So that's where I say, guys, over to you. Why?
So we've already had a comment from Anna Henderson, actually, and I'm just going to bring the screen back. Oh, just click the wrong button. Who's asked, are there any organisations that you feel are already doing this very well that you've worked alongside, or that you've just seen are really embedding these skill sets well into their companies already?
There are some organisations that are doing it well. I happen to think Stonewater are doing it pretty well at the moment. We get asked to do complaints reviews when organisations know that there's an issue. And we get asked to do training when organisations know that there's an issue. So the issue that we've got is largely we get involved with organisations where things aren't, where they know that they need to make improvements, and that's why we get involved. But yes, there is some good practice out there, definitely.
And you've mentioned obviously it's cultural, which is part of the issue there. And
yeah.
And I think Claire's mentioned there, do you think these lessons are true for staff experience too? And I think that's where culture really does come in, isn't it? You probably see it within 5 minutes of walking in the door.
You can, when you walk up to the reception desk, you can see it, Matt. You walk up to the reception desk and you already know, you know, you're already, and we as external people are coming in as customers, aren't we? And we already know. We're coming in as customers, though, who've worked in social housing for years and years and years and years. So we're probably even more alert to the issues than a customer might be. But it's perception, isn't it? So you walk in and you already know just by the way you're greeted. And you can often in organizations, you can see into the back office, and you can see what's happening in the back office. You can see people dealing with other people on the phone. You can see the looks on people's faces. You can hear what they're saying. Yeah,
and that is very
right.
much a cultural thing that we're going to fly back to in a minute. Christine, I know you've said, did Jo say explain the videos earlier? Absolutely. So the recording of this will go live within a couple of hours of the end of the event, and I'll make sure you get that. But we can also obviously share the slides. Sian, great to have you with us. Do come in.
Hi, Matt. Hi, everyone. Yeah, I was just going to pick up on the question about from a staff point of view, and quite often we find that the culture around complaints isn't just about you don't want to deal with them. It's about staff feeling that they don't have time to look at them, so they're not a priority for them. And it's things, you know, about changing that culture to say, actually, when a complaint comes in, you give it your full and undivided attention. But there's a recognition of that takes priority over other activities. So it's about that balance for staff. But also, some of the feedback we get from customers is, you know, you say you'll get back to us in 10 days, but then nothing happens in between. And I've just experienced a complaint with the NHS, and the complaint I had a message on Friday saying, oh, just to let you know, we are investigating your complaint, but we think I wanted to let you know because I'm going to have to go on holiday. That was a month before I had any acknowledgement. So I think, you know, we can all learn from our own experience, but organisations, if you want to embed that culture, you have to give complaints the priority. And as Jo said, absolutely see it as that nugget of feedback that somebody's telling you, do you know what, this wasn't right for me? And it may well be that it was never going to be right for that customer. There are cases like that. It may well be there's something you can't change. But actually, sometimes you think, oh, yeah, you know what, why would it be right?
Well, I have to say, in roles that I've worked in a number of positions, actually, that the ring's true. And there's also that element of going, A, if I deal with this complaint, I'm going to be told off because it isn't how I should be spending my time, as you've mentioned there. But also, I completely agree. But also, there's that part of going, no matter what I do with this complaint, nothing's going to change anyway. So I'm just, and again, that is a cultural thing. And Jo, I completely agree. Dan Horn, I didn't realize you're with us, Dan. Dan is actually from Recycle, one of the businesses I mentioned earlier. Our toolbar is on the British Gas website, and we hear about this makes it easier for people with additional needs to make complaints, but we never hear about what happened with those complaints. And that's really, really interesting. And Tom has said there, absolutely agree, empower staff, take ownership of complaints and be accountable. Jo Simcox, great to have you with us. Do come in. Sorry for the confusion earlier.
Hi all. So I just kind of want to share a bit of an anecdote and some practical working. So I'm currently working with Jo and Sian from Big Picture Training because I commissioned a complaints review myself, having undertaken responsibility for complaints within my organisation. And it's been really enlightening because I undertook complaints start of July officially from a previous incumbent. And we knew there was things that weren't quite going so right and plenty of room for opportunity. And it's been really insightful working with Jo and Sian about some of the information that we've been working together on. But the simple fact, when Sian and I were sitting chatting with customers who had gone through our complaints process, and as Jo said earlier, it's using that for vital information and that vital feedback. It's not always looking at the black and white of what's actually been said in the complaint whenever it comes in from people and the compliments, but it's how you're looking at those emotions with customers as well, and how you are actually demonstrating what you're learning back. And it's, you know, like most organisations, we are on that huge learning journey about making improvements, especially going against the Ombudsman code and identifying those room for opportunities for the next 12 months. But I'd absolutely agree and reinforce Jo's point. Complaints and the management of complaints and the respect for customers is all about the culture of the organisation. That has to be worked on, as well as the whole complaints piece as well.
Absolutely. And there's I always talk about 4 quadrants of complaints. Actually, there's when the service is going well and we get a compliment, we pat ourselves on the back and we think we're doing really well. The second quadrant, where a service complaint comes in and we find that there is no complaint to answer, but there's usually still some learning for us in there somewhere. There's been some sort of disagreement or something that the customer hasn't understood, which is still a learning point for us. So, you know, we still look for the learning in those. Then you've got the silent voice, those people who aren't complaining to you. So we see a reduction in complaints as being a good thing. It's not necessarily a good thing. It could mean people just aren't bothering anymore. And then there's when we've actually got a complaint and there has been a service failure, and it's how we respond to that that's absolutely vital, because that can turn a reasonable person into an unreasonable person really quickly. And I know I've become a vexatious complainant before now, simply because of the way I've been treated. And as Sian said, with the NHS, some organisations see that 10-day period as being a deadline. You know, I've got 10 days to respond to this complaint. And I say, no, you haven't. You've got to respond to that complaint as quickly as you possibly can, because every hour that you wait, that is a person getting more and more angry with you because they're not getting the service that they want. So yes, you've got a 10-day target, but actually that's not the time that you've got. That's the longest time that you've got. If it goes outside of that, then you've been, well, actually 10 days even is.
I know we've talked before, Jo, about targets in complaints anyway, and I will come back to that. I'm going to bring Joanne Mason in just a second. A couple of points in the chat first. So Rachel Honey Jones, the culture point is critical. If staff don't feel empowered and sit in an organisation which has a blame culture, that's where the hot potato analogy comes in, and she totally agrees with Tom there. Sybil, absolutely, will make sure you get the explainer video links. And Carl Sandland, Jo is bang on with her point about just being able to tell about the company culture and their thoughts on complaints just by the reception area. And I would extend this to also being just as evident from the first couple of sentences spoken by a complaint call handler. Anna Henderson, also need to weed out the get it closed attitude rather than get it fixed. And Tom has asked, are KPIs more of a hindrance? I will absolutely come back to that and Claire Patterson's point in a second. But Jo, Joanne Mason, thank you for being patient. I'll bring you in now. You might still be on mute.
Thank you. Yeah, just a point about the culture as well, which I agree with everything that's been said there around the culture. And one of the things that stands out for me is just in organisations generally, I think because we have a team called customer service or solutions or complaints handling, it's sometimes easy for other areas of the business to think, well, that's not part of my job. We've got a team that handles that. So I think part of the culture, when you put the customer at the heart of everything that you do, it's getting sort of those wider teams, the bigger pictures, to think from the get-go, their whole processes, the customer journey and all of that. And that's just helpful to help with cultural change, when people realise that actually, how does what I'm doing impact the customer? And if it went horribly wrong, or even not so, if it just wasn't accessible, like as Jo said earlier on, then I think that helps with just general thinking and being able to take responsibility. So I think it starts way before complaints even.
Oh, it does, Joanne, you're absolutely right. This is
I'm
one
just
of the
going to
reasons.
put a question out there actually, just on this, because as Jo is, and those who've been on a number of these roundtables before know, these roundtables were set up first and foremost to get people together to help create change, because people who tend to come on these, people who want to see change in the sector and they know it needs to change. We've talked a lot about culture already, and Joanne, I completely agree with your point there, that it is a huge thing. Jo, from your training, from your experience, from what you've delivered so far, this is before I come to some of the other points in the chat, what's the first thing we need to do to change that culture? Because it's clear culture needs to change. How do we take those first steps?
Internal. One of the third things I do, Matt, is when an organisation contacts us, because we provide customer service training as well, when they contact us and say they want us to do customer service training for their front-facing staff, I say, there is no point in me giving your front-facing staff customer service training if you're not going to roll it out across the whole organisation, because it's a whole of organisation thing. It's cultural. It's your front-facing staff come to work every day to provide the best possible service that they can, and they're not being able to do that. They've got the skills, otherwise you wouldn't have employed them. And they're not able to do that because of what everyone else in the organisation is doing. And it's them that need their awareness raising. It's internal customer service that is hindering your external customer service. So absolutely what
So do you think
Joanne
that
was
first
saying,
step almost is get your senior leadership teams onto some kind of get that executive team onto almost customer service training themselves and see if there's anything they're missing is the first step we need to be taking across the sector.
Well, something like that. And that's exactly what we've done with an organisation in Australia, Elaine and I, because we've got fed up with this. We're going in and we're giving frontline staff, front-facing staff customer service training, and we know we're not going to be able to make a difference because it's not them that needs the training. So we've started to insist now, and we've just done it with one organisation in Australia where we've insisted that the exec and the senior management team come on the pilot session. And oh wow, the energy in that room was amazing, wasn't it, Ellie? It was fantastic. When
you feel like you've got everyone behind, when you feel your executive team are behind you, you feel safe doing it. Ellie, I know it's probably middle of the night for you, so thank you so much for being with us today. It really is good. I'm going to bring in Tom and Emily in a second, but just on some of the other points in the chat. So before we jump back to KPIs point, which I'm sure Tom is about to bring up, but Claire Patterson, who was with us on an amazing data, does housing hold too much data roundtable actually last week, and do go check out the recording of that. That second quadrant is very visible in data protection. Many organizations get complaints that their data has been shared or otherwise used unlawfully. It turns out it was valid and lawful, but the customer hadn't understood how their data was being used. It still takes up lots of resources to deal with, and there's a lot of learning there too. So completely agree. Yasmin, collaboration between internal teams is vital. It's positive complaints culture. Rachel Honey-Jones completely agrees with Joanne. One of her biggest bugbears when people shy away from customer experience not being everybody's responsibility, and more and more agreement in the chat. Sybil, when we induct new staff, it's an important part of it. I imagine induction is a big part of what you do, Jo. And complaints aren't just a customer service part, and lessons learned to reduce the actual number of complaints that are coming through. That's from Michelle Wood. I would keep counting on, but we're going. So Tom Prout, I'm going to bring you in, and then Jo Leckie, I'll come back to you after that.
Hi, thanks, Matt. Morning, everybody. Just a quick question from my side is, how are your organizations triaging these complaints? Because it just seems that, like Jo said, is that people get upset and they become emotive because they're not being listened to. So surely there's a way that you could, how do you track and report your complaints in a way that you're actually constantly giving feedback, not waiting for that 10-day period to end before panicking? What tools are you guys using, if any, to actually monitor that and constantly give feedback? There's so much available out there nowadays that can do that for you. I just want to know, is anybody triaging their stuff that way, or is it just as they come in, they just dealt with on a first come, first serve basis?
Jo, back to you.
Well, it's back out to everybody else, really. What is happening out there, because we can only tell you what we see. Generally, what we see is a complaint comes in and they're dealt with in date order. So they come in, they're dealt with, they are assigned to a responsible manager who then manages that complaint, and they look at the procedure, they've got 10 days to respond, and that's what they do. They wait 10 days to respond. So the acknowledgement might have gone out from the complaints team, if you like. They'll send they've got 3 days to acknowledge a complaint, and they'll do that within their 3 days. And then the manager who gets that complaint, they've got 10 days, and they may sit on that for a couple of days before they then even think about making contact with someone. If they think about making contact, Tom, and you'll be surprised at the number of times I've seen complicated complaint issues where there's been a response without even talking to customer, because you can't possibly understand how that person's feeling, what's going on behind the words that they've written to you. You need to speak to them. There's a number of times I've seen that. You just wouldn't. It's just so frustrating. Yeah.
I'd love anybody who's got any other ideas on that. Please stick them in the chat.
Anybody else got any more sophisticated systems?
Yeah, absolutely. Emily Pippard, I'm going to bring you in. Great to have you with us. You're on mute if you are speaking.
Yeah,
hello,
I can't
lovely.
get the video on at the moment, sorry.
Right.
I just wanted to reiterate all the points that have been made about talking directly to customers, but also just a point about, as people get more senior in the management, become further and further away from the people that are making the complaint. And I can pick out so clearly in my organisation, I work for Gateshead Council, a couple of different managers who they're unafraid of making those phone calls to the complainant, And as a result, they get all the information they need and they get it resolved quicker. And you've got other managers who avoid speaking to them or ask someone else to do the information gathering. And it just makes the whole process so much longer and more complicated because you've got too many people involved.
Yeah.
That was my only point, really.
Yep.
No, that's absolutely brilliant. And it's, again, I think we do overcomplicate things. Claire Lawrence, I'm going to bring you in. Still got you on mute as well, I think.
Sorry.
There we are, lovely.
My question is really, it kind of connected to my comment that I made in the chat, which was around whether the same principles apply to the way staff interact with their organisation. And I'm interested to know whether you've got any examples of good practice of trend analysis of both customer complaints and staff feedback as well.
No.
Bit of a worry.
I haven't, and it's interesting you say that, because actually the two do correlate, don't they? So staff satisfaction will lead to good customer service. If you've got satisfied staff, you'll have, and this is one of the things I've blogged about. Organizations collect all of this data. They're doing staff surveys, they're doing customer surveys, but do they ever pull the both together and correlate the two? And I haven't seen any work on that. And actually, I was even asking the other day about if anyone's ever even tried to price up the cost of a complaint. And organizations haven't done that either. How much is a complaint costing you? So there's very few organizations, you know, you ask the big ones who you think will have done it. No, we're thinking about it, but we haven't done it yet. So it's interesting. We've got all this data, but we're just data in the UK. We're just not using it effectively.
I was wondering though, Jo. I was like, sorry, Claire.
Sorry, it's an Australian thing.
Because Claire, I imagine this is a big piece for you around what you're doing at the minute.
Yeah, I've got a situation where my staff team, my directorate that I work in, we've recently done the whole, you know, staff satisfaction piece, you know, the survey, risk company survey, and so on. So we've got a set of data from that which tells us certain information about what the staff team think. But interestingly, I think it's also reflected in the customer feedback that we get, and I don't think anyone's correlating that. And I can see it as the manager of the service. I can it feels right. It feels like I can understand where the two issues coincide.
I will do, because if you're coming to work and you're suffering from compassion fatigue and nobody's helping you out with that, if you feel that you can't make a difference in the role that you're in, if you keep getting the same complaints over and over again and you know you can't do anything about it, I've been there where I felt, and that's as a manager. You know, if, oh God, another one, I'm going to have to go into battle again over this. Why has nothing changed? You know, we only dealt with one of these 2 months ago. You know, why am I still receiving the same complaints? And I feel like that. How are the people who are at the coalface feeling?
Of course. And the comment that was just made.
Why are you still getting it? Why are you still getting the same stuff? You know, why aren't we fixing this? I imagine it's the bigger thing. Sorry, Claire.
Just when you mentioned costs a moment ago, Jo, made me think that I don't think we necessarily capture, even if we are capturing the cost, and I don't think there are many organisations that are, but there's a whole load of soft costs which we don't realise are connected to.
How do you quantify those? Because I started trying to work it out, Claire. I started thinking, okay, roughly how much would a complaint cost? And I started thinking about all those hidden costs. It would be hard to do.
Claire,
but
what kind of soft costs were you looking at?
For staff, I'm thinking about turnover. About dissatisfied staff results in higher turnover, and so if we lose good people,
sick days,
when it was unnecessary, sick days, absolutely, poor feedback,
time
and
in general.
Yeah, their time, and they go off and speak to their friends, their family, and that has a massive impact on the organisation's reputation.
Do you know, there's one organisation, and this is some feedback from a training session, where he said, I've been going to the same barbers for 15 years, and every time I go in there, he moans about the organisation I work for. He said, I daren't tell my barber where I work. So he's that, he's that ashamed of where he works that he dared say where he works. He says he takes his uniform off before he leaves the building because he doesn't want anyone in the area to know where he works.
Shame, it's not something that we should feel as an industry, is it?
No.
Oh, absolutely not. And actually, there's a hell of a lot of pride that goes into it. But as you say, when you feel like you can't actually make the change, and actually I think what Jo mentioned earlier was the key point, is when people feel they can't make a change, because that's quite often why people get into the sector. And regardless of the narrative that is around, actually a lot of tenants don't need helping, they don't need support, they just want their homes looked after properly. But that still is an impact. So a couple of points on the chat, and then I'm going to bring in Sian and back to Tom. Obviously, if anyone wants to jump in, please feel do. I know Yasmin, you raised your hand and then dropped it, so I don't know if you want me to bring you in, let me know. But Daryl, anecdote from me, Daryl King from Thrive. I have a friend who lives in social housing who's suffering with MS. She finds that her complaints for the most part are only addressed once. She becomes a nuisance to the service desk and makes emotional appeals about the help she needs. Yeah. That's just it's just awful to hear. And Christine Boland, I would always visit complainants if I could to discuss their complaint in person. Not as easy in a larger organisation or with recent contact restrictions. A phone call and that human connection are still so important for effective resolution. Anna Henderson has asked, do you think it works better if independent managers respond to complaints for other service areas? Yeah. Interesting question. I'll bring back to Jo. So we'll go to Sian and Jo in a minute, but Yasmin, avert complaints by ensuring complaints training is ongoing at all times. Christine, I think manager leaders need to own the dissatisfaction and service failures for their areas. And finally, Tom, one of our clients has done a cost breakdown on taking repair and customer service calls. If anyone would like some unbiased advice on how you can track report, I'm happy to share that. Sian, I'm going to bring you in.
Thanks, Matt. Just a couple of things. Going right back to when we were talking about contacting customers and having a conversation with them. Actually, what they've put their complaint in about might not be the real issue. Yeah. And it might be something else that if you don't find out, actually that customer never gets the satisfaction because that was the final straw, perhaps. That was one point. 100% agree with, if staff aren't satisfied with their organisation, with their own internal complaints process, they're not going to be at their best giving customer service. It's just blatantly obvious. And, I think as a sector, we really need to recognise that some of the complaints that our customers are dealing with and some of the issues that our customers are dealing with, our staff are dealing with as well. So, we've all lived through COVID, we're all living through the cost of living. How can we make sure we support our staff to make sure they can deliver that advice and guidance and support to customers? I once did a cost analysis of a complaint. It was a stage 2 complaint that came to me. And I was really fed up with it because actually all that was needed to do at the start was to deal with the complaint properly, speak to the customer, because the customer just kept saying, I don't feel you're listening to me, because nobody had picked up the phone or gone and seen them. And it worked out with just the time we'd spent stopping other people from doing their day job. It worked out about £6,500 for one complaint. And if it went to stage 3 and you start to involve, because we had 3 stages at that time, if you'd involved a director in it, imagine what that would have gone to. The £6,500, what could you have done with £6,500 in our sector? So what a difference. And just to say, when we're talking about complaints and that empathy and all that kind of stuff that comes in, what people don't wake up in the morning and think, do you know what, I'm going to give really crap customer service today. I'm going to be rubbish. I'm not going to listen to customers. They don't wake up and think that. We, as managers within the sector and organisations within the sector, create that environment of that pressure for people to rush things through because we don't put the emphasis on that complaint. Yeah, we we send out an annual survey and we fall all over it. We're looking at every little thing, we're analysing it, and then we pat ourselves on the back because we think we're really good. So why don't we give that much empowerment to somebody who's individually taken time out of their day to say, do you know what, this isn't quite right? And that's just where I wanted to leave it. Yeah.
No, I'm going to bring Claire back in on that because I can see she's, Claire, were there a couple of points you were going to make on that?
It was the issue about involving other people, other directorates, other teams.
That's exactly what I wanted to fly back with Anna Henderson's point about better if independent managers respond to complaints.
I think the challenge sometimes in an organisation, in a relatively medium-sized or small organisation, is that they're not as independent as they seem because they always have a relationship with that team, even if it's just a colleague-to-colleague relationship, and you continue to have to work with them. So it's hard to be critical to your colleagues because they're kind of like your work friends, aren't they? Mm-hmm. So can you really be honest if you speak to another team and say, I've reviewed this complaint or the detail of this complaint, and I just don't think your team did well enough. don't think they behave properly.
Again, it's about high performing teams can have what we call unfiltered debate, so they should be able to say those things to each other. If you're a high performing team, you'll be able to give feedback to another team member that they might not necessarily like, but they'll take it on board because they'll appreciate that you're doing it for the benefit of the organization. That's what high
takes a
performing
confidence in you as a manager, you and your team, but from both sides, and be able to someone to give you. I remember once getting a thing where we did an anonymous it was when you came through the management training. The idea was that everyone in the business then could assess you, give you an anonymous feedback on whether or not you made a good manager. One of the worst things ever, getting 50 people to give you anonymous feedback on everything.
I've had that. It's horrible.
Because it comes through, you're like, I don't like some of these people. Like, this isn't going to, but that's one of those. And it is difficult. So Claire, I do agree with you, but I think there's still that constant review process does need to go on in some capacity. And if the directors aren't particularly good at giving customer, if their focus isn't customer excellence, it isn't going to come through in that culture. And again, I guess it comes back to that key word, doesn't it?
And we don't like receiving feedback, Matt, because often it's telling us something we already knew anyway that we didn't like. We don't want to hear about ourselves or our team or whatever. And that's why sometimes feedback, we see it negatively because we don't really want to hear it, but we know it. We know we've got to do something about it.
We do. Paul O'Callaghan has put in the chat there two sort of quick points. One, resources. Complaints teams are usually very small in terms of numbers, which can hamper staff satisfaction if they become overwhelmed. Salaries are too low. And the Ombudsman recently flagged capacity as a key area of focus for providers. And then number two, the use of insight is so important to prevent and prevent repetition and similar complaints. Again, the Ombudsman is lighting the path a little here with deep dives into damp and mold, noise, etc., areas where they can see high volumes of complaints.
Yeah. And really, that's what we should be measuring. We should be measuring where we're getting repeat instances of the same complaint, not the volume of complaints, but where there's repeat instances of the same complaint. Having a look at that and thinking, why and how can we stop this? You know, because we're obviously keep repeating the same mistakes over and over again. It's just giving us more work. So how are we going to, and dissatisfied customers? So how are we going to deal with this?
At least then you can let a particular tenant or whoever it is know, look, we're getting a number of these. This is what we're doing to sort it, which is all you really want to hear. Tom Prout, let me bring you in.
Yeah, thanks again. Yeah, just going back a point. I think when we're talking about problem, it seems to come down to a training issue again, Joe. I think you've got people in the front line, and I think, you know, as humans, we take the human elements and the emotions side of things quite personally. You know, we're not robots. So if somebody's angry and aggressive because a call's been delayed or it hasn't been dealt with, it's causing hesitation for the customer service guys to pick up the phone again, like you said. So is there no way that, I don't know, again, is it maybe the people need to look at putting a practice in place to say that, well, look, before it gets to that heated place, how do we sort this out? Because if 10 days seems to be a long time, you know, for someone who's having an issue, you know, is it not worth the HA saying, look, we are maybe understaffed, under-resourced, but the problem is that all those people dealing with those negative complaints all day, it's going to affect them, it's going to affect their well-being without a doubt, and they're going to become more hesitant to pick up the phone. So it's almost it's a vicious circle of like, oh, I don't want to speak to that customer because he's going to make me feel emotive or guilty, or, you know, I'm not in the mood for being shouted at. How do you fix it? I think that's probably what the reason is we're here for. Is it purely a customer service issue? I don't think so.
No, it's whole of organization. It's cultural. Everything has to change. When the processes work well, when staff feel empowered, when staff feel cared for and respected, they will naturally give a good customer service, because they don't come to work to do a bad job. As Sian said, one of the first things we do on customer service training is ask, why do you work in social housing? What's your why? And most people say because they want to make a difference. They're here because they want to make a difference. They're not coming into work because they want to upset people. They're coming into work because they want to help people. But it's what happens when they're in work that stops them from being able to do that. That's what we need to sort out.
Yeah. Okay.
As Sian has mentioned there in the chat, she's written a damp and mold policy starts with a home visit to every customer who raises a damp and mold complaint, because it needs that level of empathy and recognition. And that's, I guess, part of the challenge, isn't it? But, you know, I mean, if I'm putting this on a swivel, because we've only got kind of 5 minutes left, from a commercial aspect, and I know we've talked about the price of complaint, and I think this is one of the key things, one of the other key takeaways, other than culture and actually getting it executive down, is, as Sean says, £6,500 for a complaint previously. How does, when you're speaking to execs, when you're speaking to heads of service, whoever it might be, and you're explaining that this is what needs to happen, this is going to be the cost of ABC, but you must do it now.
Yeah.
Where do you get the biggest kind of pushback? Because to me, if you've got your customer satisfaction survey showing that your customers are unhappy, and you've got your staff satisfaction surveys going they're unhappy, and this can help both, where is the biggest pushback there? Do you think it's fear at kind of being able to kind of go, yeah, actually we're not doing as well as we think, or is it more than that?
They're under so much pressure at the moment financially, housing providers, in terms of so much spend on safety measures, and just think about what's going on in the sector at the moment. Unfortunately, what's happening is they're cutting back on really basic stuff, which is impacting on customer satisfaction. And in cutting back on that, they're causing the problems. And when they cut back on it, they're not necessarily communicating it across the organisation. So they might decide, for example, we're going to take a decision not to do any more plasterwork repairs for the next 6 weeks. But nobody communicates that to the customer service team. So they're getting plasterwork complaints coming in, and people are saying, I have raised a repair for a plaster work or follow-on plaster works should have happened, and they've not happened. And the customer service team doesn't know why. And they're getting all these complaints and they don't know why they're not happening. And they don't know what, then when they find out what's happening, they don't know what to tell people. You know, they can't give people the light at the end of the tunnel, because people are saying, yeah, well, we don't know when we're going to start them again. Well, that's just not good enough, is it, to say we don't know when we're going to start doing it again. This is just one example. Yeah.
So is that communication piece is the big piece?
It's internal customer service that's the issue. Again, the communication piece.
And it is, it's realizing it's that internal and external customers are everything at the moment. And I know there was a request that we actually do a roundtable, and I'm waiting for someone to kind of step up who can help in terms of how big is a social housing provider before it gets too big. And that obviously brings in mergers and other stuff, but there is a line. There is that line where actually, if you get too big, you literally can't resolve your complaints because your patches sizes are too big, etc. Anna Henderson, complaint resources should also be better. They fall into 3 broad approaches. Defeatist, sorry, we should have done better. Defensive, never happened before. Perhaps apologetic, but not really committed to change.
I hate that. It's never happened before. It doesn't mean that nobody's had it happen to them before.
And changes that are doing things, changes that are being put in place, and there isn't enough of that. Tom, there's a huge backlog from lockdown. And Christine Boland, huge pressures on operational teams at the moment. Our biggest driver of complaints is capacity to get back to people. And actually, that's why most people are in it. But as you say, the amount of pressure, I think, coming from a commercial perspective is there. But as you've mentioned earlier, Jo, all of your training is based around the ombudsman at the moment and what's coming through from the regulators. So if you don't get ahead of this, you're going to be in even more trouble further down the line. I'll leave you with final comments, Jo, but from me, just a massive thank you, because this has been a really, really great roundtable today. The hour again has flown by, and we will make sure those slides and things get shared around, the information gets shared. But Jo, in terms of final comment, what would you like to say to people who have joined us today? They're going, we need to change, but we don't know where to start.
I'd say you need to think about the values that your organisation publishes on your websites, because your values will say things like respect, honesty, integrity. You are not living your values if you've got these issues, and how are you going to address that? That's one of the reasons why our customer service training is a values-based training, because it takes it right back to your values, the values of your organisation and the expected behaviours. And we talk about what's stopping you as an organisation from being able to do that and getting to the bottom of it. And the training room is a great environment to do that, because you get some honesty coming across. But which you don't get in staff surveys.
Speaking to the execs, isn't it? And kind of going, actually, we're doing this.
Execs on board. It's not. This isn't just. It's you guys. You work for the organisation too. You know, chief exec, chairman of the board, everybody. It's not them and us. It's all of you. And actually, the exec, you need to lead the way. The chief exec, you're leading the way. So
as Lara has put in the chat, adopt the my mum test. If it isn't good enough for my mum, it isn't good enough for me. Thank you, everybody. As ever, we will be doing, these are every single Tuesday. We're gaining some great momentum. Next week, we've got Michelle Hocknell coming on to discuss the future of heat.
It's great.
And actually, we've got two, I'll tell you, I'm looking completely the wrong week. I'm talking absolute rubbish. Next week is Jo Simcox, who's been with us today, talking about what makes a good social housing leader versus a good social housing manager. It'll be really, really interesting. And that's being backed up by her thesis work. So please join us for that. As ever, these are all backed up by my recruitment work. So if you do need any support with recruitment, please reach out. But in the interim, thank you everybody for coming. Hope you've got some good takeaways, and I'll send around the information from whoever wants it once Jo and I have caught up post chat today. But Jo, thank you. And thank you, Sian and Ellie, for coming along to everyone at Big Picture Training. You're genuinely brilliant, and I'm more than happy advocating for you every step of the way.
Thank you so much. And it's a pleasure. We love it.
Oh, go on,
thank
Claire.
you.
Thank you. Really, I need to dash off too.
All right, no worries. Take care.
Cheers. Thank you. Bye-bye.